The gunshot echoed through the canyon like distant thunder, sending a flock of startled ravens into the amber sky as Rosalie Pennington urged her exhausted horse forward. Blood trickled down her arm, staining her tattered dress, but she couldn't stop, not when the men who'd murdered her father were likely still on her trail. When the silhouette of a barn appeared against the setting Colorado sun, Rosalie nearly wept with relief. Cherry Creek was still 10 miles north, but this isolated ranch might be her salvation, at least for the night. It was 1876, and the promise of a new life in the West had turned to ashes around her. With trembling hands, Rosalie guided her horse, a mare she'd taken from her family's stable, before fleeing toward the weathered structure. No lights shone from the nearby cabin, giving her hope that she might find temporary refuge without confrontation. As darkness fell, Rosalie slipped inside the barn, the scent of hay and horses filling her nostrils. She tethered her mare beside the other horses, whispering soft apologies as she removed the saddle. Her arm throbbed with pain, but the bleeding had slowed. Finding a secluded corner in the hayloft, she collapsed, exhaustion finally overwhelming her as consciousness slipped away. Reid Xavier woke before dawn, as was his habit since purchasing the ranch 3 years prior. At 32, he had settled into the rhythms of ranch life after years of driving cattle across the unforgiving territories. His ranch outside Cherry Creek was modest but growing, and while the solitude sometimes weighed on him, he preferred it to the chaos of his past. The morning air carried the chill of early autumn as Reid made his way to the barn. Something felt different, a disturbance in the usual morning quiet. His hand moved instinctively to the revolver at his hip as he pushed open the barn door. His horses nickered in greeting, but Reid's attention was drawn to the unfamiliar mare standing among them. The animal was beautiful but clearly exhausted, its coat darkened with sweat and dust from hard riding. "Hello," Reid called out, voice firm but not threatening. "Whoever you are, I'm armed. Show yourself." In the silence that followed, Reid scanned the barn, his gaze eventually drifting upward to the hayloft. Moving cautiously, he climbed the ladder, revolver ready but not drawn. What he found made him freeze. A woman lay unconscious amid the hay, her dress torn and blood-stained. Her dark hair fanned out around her pale face, and the dried blood on her arm suggested she'd been wounded. Reid holstered his weapon and knelt beside her. "Miss, can you hear me?" Rosalie's eyes fluttered open, panic seizing her as she registered the man's presence. She scrambled backward, ignoring the searing pain in her arm. "Stay back," she demanded, her voice hoarse with fear. Reid raised his hands, showing her empty palms. "I mean no harm, miss. This is my barn you're bleeding in." Something in his steady blue eyes and calm demeanor made Rosalie hesitate. She assessed him quickly, tall and broad-shouldered with sun-weathered skin, and a neatly trimmed beard that couldn't hide the small scar on his jawline. He wasn't one of her pursuers. I'm sorry," she managed, suddenly aware of the throbbing in her arm. "I needed shelter. I'll be gone before noon." "You're hurt," Reid observed, gesturing to her arm. "And from the looks of your horse, you've been riding hard. Why don't we start with getting that wound cleaned up? Then you can tell me what kind of trouble has you hiding in strangers' barns." Rosalie hesitated, but pain and exhaustion left her few options. "Thank you." Reid helped her to her feet, noting how she swayed slightly. "I'm Reid Xavier," he said, supporting her as they made their way down from the hayloft. "Rosalie," she replied, deliberately omitting her surname. "Rosalie P." "Well, Miss P, let's get you to the house." Reid's cabin was simple but tidy, a main room with a stone fireplace, a small kitchen area, and 2 doors that presumably led to bedrooms. He guided Rosalie to a chair by the fire, which had burned down to embers overnight. "I'll stoke this up," he said, adding wood to the grate. "Then we'll see to that arm." As warmth flooded the room, Rosalie felt some of the tension leave her body. Reid brought a basin of water, clean cloths, and a bottle of whiskey to the table beside her. "This will hurt," he warned, pouring whiskey over a cloth. Rosalie nodded, biting her lip as he cleaned the wound, a deep graze that had torn through flesh but mercifully hadn't lodged a bullet in her arm. "You're lucky," Reid commented, wrapping a bandage around her arm. "Another inch and we'd be digging lead out of you." "Want to tell me how you came by this?" Rosalie stared into the fire, weighing how much to reveal. "Men came to our farm yesterday," she began, her voice barely above a whisper. "They killed my father and burned our home. I managed to escape, but they shot at me as I fled." Reid's expression remained neutral, though his eyes darkened. "These men have names, Becker and his men, from the Blake Mining Company." The words tasted bitter on her tongue. "My father refused to sell our land." Recognition flickered across Reid's face. "Thomas Blake's outfit. They've been buying up land all through this territory." "My father's farm sat on a silver vein," Rosalie explained. "He discovered it months ago but told no one except me. He was going to file a claim properly, but Becker somehow found out." Tears welled in her eyes. "When father refused their offer, her voice broke. Reid didn't press for more. Instead, he moved to the stove and began preparing breakfast. "You need to eat, then rest. We'll figure out what to do after that." As Reid cooked, Rosalie studied him. There was a quietness to him that spoke of hard experiences, yet his movements were gentle as he tended to her wound. What kind of man was this cowboy who had taken in a bloodied stranger without question, over a simple breakfast of bacon, eggs, and biscuits? Reid explained his situation. "I've been in Cherry Creek for 3 years now. Drove cattle before that, saved enough to buy this place. It's small, but it's growing." "Do you have family nearby?" Rosalie asked, realizing she hadn't seen evidence of a wife or children. Reid shook his head. "Lost my parents young. No siblings." "No wife." He said it matter-of-factly, without self-pity. "Ranch keeps me busy enough." After breakfast, Reid showed Rosalie to the cabin's spare room. "Rest. Your horse needs it too, and so do you. We'll talk more when you've slept." Exhaustion overwhelmed her as soon as her head touched the pillow. Despite the danger still lurking, Rosalie fell into a deep sleep, the first untroubled rest she'd had since her world had shattered. Reid spent the morning tending to his horses, including Rosalie's mare, and completing his usual chores. His mind, however, kept returning to the woman sleeping in his spare room. Her story wasn't unusual in these parts, greedy men taking what they wanted by force, but something about her quiet dignity in the face of tragedy struck him. Blake Mining had a reputation for aggressive expansion, but murder was another matter entirely. If what Rosalie said was true, she was in grave danger. The question was what to do about it. By mid-afternoon, Reid had made a decision. When Rosalie finally emerged from the bedroom, hair tousled from sleep, but with more color in her cheeks, he had a proposition ready. "Miss P," he began, pouring her a cup of coffee, "I've been thinking about your situation. Blake's men will be looking for you, and a woman traveling alone is too conspicuous." Rosalie accepted the coffee with a nod. "I know. I need to reach the U.S. Marshal in Denver. My father kept documentation of the silver discovery and Blake's threats. I have them with me." "That's sensible," Reid agreed, "but it's a journey of several days, and if these men are as determined as you say, the roads will be watched. What do you suggest?" Rosalie asked, a wariness in her eyes that spoke of her newfound distrust of others. Reid met her gaze directly. "Stay here, at least until your arm heals. My ranch is isolated enough that few people come this way." Meanwhile, I'll make inquiries in town discreetly about Blake's men and their movements. Why would you help me? Rosalie asked, the question direct but not ungrateful. You don't know me. A ghost of a smile touched Reid's lips. Let's just say I've seen enough injustice to know which side I stand on. Besides, he added, his tone lightening slightly, my mother would haunt me if I turned away someone in need. Something in his simple decency broke through Rosalie's carefully constructed wall of suspicion. Thank you, Mr. Xavier. I accept your offer, though I insist on earning my keep while I'm here. Reid, he corrected. And I won't turn down an extra pair of hands around the place, even if one of them is temporarily out of commission. That evening, as they shared a simple supper, Rosalie began to reveal more about herself, though still guarded about certain details. My father was a school teacher back east before we came west 2 years ago, she explained. My mother died when I was 16, and afterward, father dreamed of starting fresh. He taught me everything: reading, mathematics, even some Latin. Explains your speech, Reid commented. Not many around these parts quote Shakespeare when delirious with pain. Rosalie looked startled, then embarrassed. Was I reciting in the barn? I don't remember. Reid nodded, amusement warming his eyes. The quality of mercy is not strained, Merchant of Venice, if I recall correctly. It was Rosalie's turn to look surprised. You know Shakespeare? 8 years of cattle drives leaves plenty of time for reading, Reid explained. Books travel better than most company. A comfortable silence settled between them as night fell outside the cabin windows. For the first time since her father's murder, Rosalie felt something other than fear, a tentative sense of safety in this stranger's home. The next morning, Reid prepared to ride into Cherry Creek for supplies and information. Before leaving, he showed Rosalie where he kept his spare revolver. You know how to use one of these? He asked, holding out the Colt. Rosalie took it with practiced ease. My father insisted I learn, said a woman alone needs to protect herself. Reid nodded, impressed by her confidence. If anyone comes while I'm gone, don't hesitate. But I doubt anyone will find you here. The next ranch is 5 miles away, and folks around here mind their own business. After Reid departed, Rosalie took stock of her temporary sanctuary. Despite her injury, there was much she could do. Laundry needed washing, the cabin floor wanted sweeping, and she noticed Reid's shirts hanging on a line outside, needing mending. Working with one good arm presented challenges, but the familiar routine of domestic tasks helped calm her mind. As she sat on the porch, carefully stitching a tear in one of Reid's work shirts, she allowed herself to consider her situation more clearly. The documents she carried, her father's deed to the land, his notes on the silver discovery, and a letter detailing Blake's threats were valuable evidence, but would a marshal act on them? Could the word of a young woman stand against a powerful mining company? More troubling was the question of what would come after. Her home was destroyed, her father dead. At 22, with no family and limited funds, her options were few. Marriage to a stranger for protection, or finding work as a schoolteacher, perhaps both paths fraught with uncertainty. In Cherry Creek, Reid moved through his errands with deliberate casualness. At the general store, he gathered supplies while listening to local gossip. The proprietor, Henry Wilkins, was always a good source of information. Heard there was some trouble over by Elk Mountain, Reid mentioned as Henry tallied his purchases. Something about a farmhouse burning. Henry nodded, lowering his voice despite the empty store. Bad business, that. Old man Pennington's place. Found him shot dead, they did. Daughter missing, Rosalie's her name. Pretty young thing, educated too. Sheriff's looking for her, saying she might know something about her pa's death. Reid kept his expression neutral. Any ideas what happened? Henry shrugged. Some say land dispute, others robbery gone wrong. Blake's men have been around asking about her offering a reward for information, say they're concerned for her safety. Generous of them, Reid remarked dryly. Ain't it just? Henry agreed, his tone suggesting he shared Reid's skepticism. Word is Blake wanted that land something fierce. Rumor has it there's silver there. Wouldn't be the first time a man died for what's in the ground, Reid observed, paying for his purchases. Appreciate the information, Henry. You see that girl, you tell her to come to town, Henry added. Sheriff Mason's an honest man, he'll see justice done. Reid nodded noncommittally. Sheriff Mason might indeed be honest, but he was also one man against a powerful company with hired guns. Justice wasn't always as simple as bringing criminals before the law, especially when the criminals could buy their way out of trouble. At the livery stable, Reid learned more. Two strangers had been asking about a young woman on a chestnut mare, offering good money for information. They'd mentioned she might be hurt and claimed to be relatives concerned for her welfare. By the time Reid started back to his ranch, the sun was low in the sky and his mind was heavy with concern. Blake's men were actively searching for Rosalie, and they had resources to continue the hunt. Sooner or later, someone might remember the quiet rancher who lived outside of town and decide his isolated property was worth checking. As Reid approached his cabin, he saw smoke rising from the chimney and caught the scent of cooking food. Through the window, he glimpsed Rosalie moving about the kitchen, her dark hair tied back simply, her injured arm held close to her body as she worked. Something about the domestic scene struck him powerfully, his lonely cabin transformed by her presence into something warmer, more like the home he'd always imagined but never quite managed to create. Shaking off the unexpected emotion, Reid dismounted and led his horse to the barn. He needed to tell Rosalie what he'd learned and help her plan her next move. His own conflicted feelings would have to wait. When Reid entered the cabin, Rosalie turned from the stove with a small smile. I hope you don't mind. I took the liberty of starting supper venison stew. I found the meat in your cold cellar. Smells good, Reid said, hanging his hat by the door. Better than my cooking, that's certain. As they sat down to eat, Reid shared what he'd learned in town, not softening the news. Rosalie listened silently, her expression growing more troubled with each revelation. They know my name, she said finally, and they're looking for me specifically. Reid nodded. They're offering rewards for information, makes people notice things they might otherwise ignore. I need to leave, Rosalie decided, pushing away her half-eaten meal. I'm putting you in danger by staying here, and you'll be in more danger on your own, Reid countered. Blake's men are watching the roads. A woman traveling alone would draw immediate attention. Frustration clouded Rosalie's features. What choice do I have? I can't hide forever. Reid considered their options carefully before speaking. There might be a way to get you safely to the marshal in Denver, but it would require an arrangement. What kind of arrangement? Rosalie asked, wariness returning to her eyes. A temporary marriage, Reid said, the words sounding strange even to his own ears. A woman traveling with her husband draws less attention than one alone. We could reach Denver, you could present your evidence to the marshal, and afterward. He paused, suddenly uncertain. Afterward, the marriage could be dissolved quietly. You'd be free to continue as you choose. Silence filled the cabin as Rosalie stared at him, her expression unreadable. You would do that? Marry a stranger to help her? Reid met her gaze steadily. It would be a marriage in name only, he assured her. My reputation in Cherry Creek is solid. No one would question us traveling together as husband and wife. And what would you gain from this arrangement? Rosalie asked, her voice soft but direct. The question caught Reid off guard. What would he gain? He hadn't considered his own benefit when formulating the plan. The satisfaction of seeing justice done, he answered finally. And perhaps, he added with a faint smile, the company on the trail. It gets lonely out here. Rosalie studied him for a long moment, weighing his sincerity against her limited options. "Very well," she said at last. "I accept your proposal, Mr. Xavier. When would this marriage take place?" "Tomorrow," Reid replied. "I know the preacher in Cherry Creek. He can perform a simple ceremony without asking too many questions. We'll need to create a story that we've been courting quietly, that your father approved before his death." "And my injury, accident with farm equipment," Reid suggested. "Happened at my ranch while you were visiting. Explains why you're staying here now being tended by your intended husband." Rosalie nodded, impressed by his quick thinking. "You've considered this thoroughly. When you live alone, you learn to think things through," Reid said simply. That night, as Rosalie lay in the spare bed, she considered the strange turn her life had taken. A week ago, she had been a farmer's daughter with simple dreams, perhaps teaching at the local school, eventually marrying someone from town. Now her father was dead, her home destroyed, and tomorrow she would marry a man she barely knew in a desperate bid for justice and survival. Reid Xavier was unlike any man she had met before. Quiet but not cold, strong but gentle in his actions. She had seen enough of the world to know that his offer was extraordinary, a risk to his reputation and possibly his life, with little benefit to himself. What manner of man made such an offer? And could she trust him to honor his word when the time came to dissolve their arrangement? With these questions circling in her mind, Rosalie finally drifted into an uneasy sleep. Morning brought a clear autumn sky as Reid and Rosalie rode into Cherry Creek. They had agreed on their story, a quiet courtship over several months, accelerated by the tragic death of her father. Rosalie wore her cleanest dress, hastily mended, with her hair pinned up beneath a modest bonnet borrowed from Reid's storage left behind. He explained briefly, by his late mother. The town of Cherry Creek was small but prosperous. A single main street lined with wooden buildings, general store, a say office, saloon, and a small white church at the far end. People nodded to Reid as they passed, curiosity in their eyes as they noted Rosalie riding beside him. Reverend Thomas welcomed them into the church, his kind face showing no surprise when Reid explained their desire for an immediate ceremony. "I heard about your father, Miss Pennington," the Reverend said gently. "A terrible tragedy. Sheriff Mason is determined to find those responsible." "Thank you, Reverend," Rosalie replied, the mention of her full name causing her to glance quickly at Reid, who gave an imperceptible nod. Her identity was already known, there was no use in hiding it now. The ceremony was brief but proper, conducted in the empty church with only the Reverend's wife as witness. Rosalie felt strangely detached as she repeated her vows, as though watching someone else pledge her life to this man. When Reid slipped a simple gold band onto her finger, his mother's, he had told her that morning the weight of it seemed to anchor her back to reality. "You may kiss your bride," Reverend Thomas instructed with a warm smile. Rosalie's heart quickened as Reid leaned forward. His kiss was gentle and brief, a mere brush of lips, yet something in it, a tenderness, perhaps left her momentarily breathless. "May God bless your union," the Reverend said, clasping their hands together. "In these difficult times, finding love is a precious thing." Love. The word struck Rosalie as profoundly wrong yet strangely fitting for their deception. This was not love but necessity, a business arrangement between strangers. Yet as Reid thanked the Reverend and led her back outside, his hand steady at her elbow, she wondered if somewhere in this charade there might be something genuine taking root. Their first challenge came immediately. Sheriff Mason was crossing the street toward them, his weathered face breaking into a smile of recognition. "Xavier," he called, approaching them. "Heard you were in town on special business." His gaze moved to Rosalie, his expression softening with sympathy. "Miss Pennington, my condolences for your father. A good man by all accounts." "Thank you, Sheriff," Rosalie replied, consciously leaning closer to Reid. "It's Mrs. Xavier now, actually." Sheriff Mason's eyebrows rose. "Is that so? Well, congratulations to you both, though I must say the timing is surprising." Reid's arm slipped protectively around Rosalie's waist. "We'd been courting for months, Sheriff. After what happened to Mr. Pennington, it didn't seem right to wait. Rosalie needed family, and now she has it." The sheriff nodded, though his eyes remained thoughtful. "I'd like to speak with you about your father's death when you're ready, Mrs. Xavier. There are questions that need answering." "Of course," Rosalie agreed, her voice steadier than she felt. "But we're leaving for Denver tomorrow. Family business that can't wait." "Denver." The sheriff frowned slightly. "That's quite a journey. Something urgent." Reid stepped in smoothly. "My late brother's affairs need settling. The lawyer can't wait any longer, and I wanted Rosalie to come along. Change of scenery might do her good after everything." Sheriff Mason seemed to accept this explanation. "I understand. Perhaps when you return, then." He tipped his hat to them both. "Safe travels. And Reid, Blake's men have been asking about Mrs. Xavier. Might want to watch your back." "Appreciated, Sheriff," Reid replied, his casual tone belied by the tension Rosalie felt in his arm around her waist. As they continued to the general store to complete their preparations for the journey, Rosalie whispered, "He suspects something." "He's cautious," Reid corrected. "That's different from suspicion. He's a good man, but his authority only extends so far. Blake's influence reaches further." In the general store, Henry Wilkins greeted them with genuine surprise and delight. "Well, if this isn't a turn-up." Reid Xavier finally taken himself a wife, and such a lovely one at that. He came around the counter to take Rosalie's hand. "Terrible about your father, my dear. Just terrible, but I'm glad you found someone to look after you." Rosalie managed a small smile. "Thank you, Mr. Wilkins. Reid has been very kind." As Reid gathered supplies for their journey, Henry leaned closer to Rosalie, lowering his voice. "There were men in here yesterday asking after you. Rough sorts. Claimed to be concerned for your welfare, but there was something not right about them." "What did you tell them?" Rosalie asked, maintaining her composure despite the chill that ran through her. "Nothing useful," Henry assured her. "Said I hadn't seen you since before your father's passing, but they're still in town staying at the hotel, just so you know." Reid returned with his purchases, noticing the serious exchange. "Everything all right?" Henry straightened up, his cheerful shopkeeper's demeanor returning. "Just welcoming your bride properly. You're a lucky man, Reid." "I know it," Reid replied, placing a protective hand on Rosalie's back. "We should be getting on, though. Long day tomorrow." As they left the store, Rosalie spotted two men across the street, watching them intently. One was tall and lean with a pockmarked face, the other shorter but heavily built with a distinctive red neckerchief. "That's them," she whispered, her body tensing. "Becker's men, the ones who killed my father." Reid didn't break stride but guided her steadily toward their horses. "Don't look at them again," he murmured. "Act natural. They're watching for signs of recognition." Rosalie focused on breathing evenly, grateful for Reid's solid presence beside her. The men made no move to approach, but their eyes followed the couple's progress down the street. Only when they were safely away from town did Rosalie release the breath she'd been holding. "They saw me. They know I'm with you now." "Good," Reid said, surprising her. Better they know you're under my protection than thinking you're alone and vulnerable. Besides, they can't be certain you recognize them. To most people, we simply look like newlyweds in a hurry to start our journey. Are we leaving for Denver tomorrow, as you told the sheriff? Reid nodded. First light. It's a 4-day ride if the weather holds. We'll need to be vigilant they might follow. Back at the ranch, they prepared methodically for the journey, packing provisions, checking their weapons, planning their route. The practical tasks helped distract Rosalie from the strangeness of her new status. Married, yet not truly wed, protected, yet still in danger. As night fell, an awkward moment arose when they realized the sleeping arrangements needed addressing. Reid solved it without ceremony. "Take the main bedroom," he said, gathering a blanket from the chest. "I'll sleep by the fire. We both need rest before tomorrow." Rosalie hesitated at the bedroom door. "This is your home. I can't take your bed." "You're my wife now, at least on paper," Reid pointed out with a hint of humor. "Consider it part of the arrangement." "Thank you," Rosalie said softly, "not just for the bed, but for everything." "Few men would do what you're doing for a stranger." Reid's expression grew serious. "You're not a stranger anymore, Rosalie. Whatever happens in Denver, whatever comes after right now, we're in this together." The sincerity in his voice touched something deep within her. For the first time since her father's death, Rosalie felt truly seen, not as a victim to be pitied or a target to be hunted, but as a person of value. "Good night, Reid," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Good night, Rosalie," he replied, his blue eyes holding hers for a moment longer than necessary. That night, lying in Reid's bed surrounded by the scent of him pine soap, leather, and something indefinably masculine, Rosalie found herself wondering about the man who had so dramatically altered her fate. What had shaped him into someone capable of such selfless action? What ghosts kept him living alone on this isolated ranch? And why, despite the danger surrounding them, did she feel safer than she had in years? Dawn broke cold and clear as Reid and Rosalie prepared to depart. They had decided to travel light, taking only what they needed for the journey and what couldn't be left behind, including the precious documents that might bring her father's killers to justice. As Rosalie secured the last of her belongings to her saddle, she noticed Reid standing at the edge of his property, gazing out over the land he had worked for 3 years. "Having second thoughts?" she asked, joining him. Reid shook his head. "Just saying goodbye in case things don't work out as we hope." "You believe we won't return?" The possibility hadn't fully occurred to Rosalie until that moment. "I believe in preparing for all outcomes," Reid replied. "If Blake's men are willing to commit murder for that silver, they won't stop because of a piece of paper or a lawman's badge." The gravity of his words settled over Rosalie. "You could still change your mind," she offered. "This isn't your fight." Reid turned to her, his expression resolute. "I made my choice when I found you in my barn, Rosalie. I don't regret it." Something unspoken passed between them, a recognition of the bond that had formed so quickly yet felt increasingly real. Without further discussion, they mounted their horses and set out toward Denver, the rising sun at their backs. The first day of travel passed without incident. They kept to less traveled trails, Reid's knowledge of the territory guiding them through forests and across streams that wouldn't appear on standard maps. By nightfall, they had covered good ground, stopping to make camp in a protected hollow near a small creek. As Reid built a fire, keeping it small to minimize visibility, Rosalie tended to the horses. The domestic rhythm of setting up camp together felt surprisingly natural, as though they had been traveling companions for years rather than days. Over a simple supper of beans and jerky, Reid spoke more about his past than he had previously, telling Rosalie about his years driving cattle from Texas to Colorado. It was a hard life, he admitted, but there was freedom in it. New horizons every day, responsibility only to yourself and the herd. What made you give it up? Rosalie asked, fascinated by this glimpse into his earlier life. Reid stared into the fire, memories playing across his features. Lost a friend on the last drive. Mountain lions spooked the herd at night, caused a stampede. Jack was caught in it. He paused, the pain still evident in his voice. After that, I wanted something more permanent, a place where I made the rules and took the consequences. Your ranch, Rosalie said, understanding. Reid nodded. It's not much compared to some spreads, but it's mine. Every fence post, every head of cattle, I built it from nothing. It's impressive, Rosalie said sincerely. My father had similar dreams when we came west. He wanted to create something lasting. Her voice faltered. Now it's all gone. Not everything, Reid said quietly. You're still here, and you have his documentation, proof of what he discovered and what was done to him. That's something. As the fire burned down to embers, Reid arranged their bedrolls on opposite sides of the dying flames. Despite the separate sleeping arrangements, there was an intimacy to sharing the night sounds of the wilderness, the distant howl of coyotes, the rustle of wind through pine needles. I'll take first watch, Reid said, checking his rifle. Get some sleep. Rosalie wanted to protest that she could take a turn at watch, but exhaustion was already pulling at her. Her injured arm ached from the day's ride, and tomorrow would bring more of the same. Wake me halfway through, she said instead, settling into her bedroll. I want to do my share. Reid's expression softened in the firelight. I will. Sleep well, Mrs. Xavier. The name, her new name, struck Rosalie anew. She was Rosalie Xavier now, at least officially. The thought followed her into sleep, bringing confused dreams of a life that might have been, in a world where their marriage was more than a necessary deception. When Reid gently shook her awake for her watch, the night was deep and still, the stars brilliant overhead. He looked tired but alert, his features shadowed in the faint glow of the banked fire. All quiet, he reported, handing her the rifle. Keep an eye on that ridge to the east. I thought I saw movement earlier, but it might have been deer. Rosalie nodded, fully awake now. Get some rest. I'll wake you at first light. As Reid settled into his bedroll, Rosalie took up position against a tree trunk, rifle across her lap. The night wrapped around her like a cloak, both comforting and intimidating in its vastness. She found herself watching Reid's sleeping form as much as the surrounding wilderness. Struck by how vulnerable he appeared in repose, the hard lines of his face softened. His customary vigilance temporarily set aside. This man had risked everything for her, his home, his safety, perhaps even his life. And for what? A sense of justice, simple kindness. Or was there something more developing between them? Rosalie pushed the thought away. Their arrangement was temporary, their marriage a necessary fiction. Any deeper feelings would only complicate an already dangerous situation. Yet as the night hours passed, she couldn't help wondering if Reid felt the same confusion of emotions that she did, the strange intimacy of strangers bound by circumstance, the growing trust that felt increasingly like something else entirely. Dawn broke with a slash of crimson across the eastern sky. Rosalie woke Reid as promised, and they broke camp efficiently, leaving minimal evidence of their presence. The second day of travel took them through rougher country, steep trails that wound through pine forests and across rocky terrain that tested both horses and riders. By midday, they had reached a high pass that offered a spectacular view of the territory they had covered. There, Reid said, pointing to a distant ribbon of silver. South Platte River. Once we cross it tomorrow, we'll be a day's ride from Denver. Rosalie shielded her eyes against the sun, taking in the vastness of the landscape. "It's beautiful," she said softly. "Even knowing what happened, I can't help loving this country." Reid glanced at her, something warming in his gaze. "It gets in your blood," he agreed. "The open space, the freedom of it. And the danger," Rosalie added more soberly. "That too," Reid acknowledged. "But that's part of its truth. Beauty and danger, often in the same breath." They continued on, the conversation shifting to practical matters: their route, water sources, where they would camp that night. As they descended from the pass into a valley dotted with aspen trees, Reid suddenly raised his hand, signaling for silence. Rosalie reined her horse to a stop, instantly alert. "What is it, riders?" Reid said quietly, pointing to dust rising in the distance behind them. 3, maybe 4, moving fast. Anxiety clutched at Rosalie's throat. "Blake's men, possibly," Reid conceded, his expression grim. "Or it could be travelers heading the same way we are. Either way, we should find cover and let them pass." They guided their horses off the trail into a dense stand of trees, dismounting to keep the animals quiet. Reid positioned himself where he could watch the approaching riders while remaining hidden. Minutes stretched like hours as they waited. Rosalie could feel her heart pounding, her palms damp with sweat. If these were Blake's men, they were well armed and desperate to prevent her from reaching Denver with her evidence. "It's them," Reid confirmed in a low voice. "Becker and 3 others. They're following our trail." Fear and anger warred within Rosalie. "How did they find us?" "We've been so careful. Someone in town must have talked," Reid said grimly. "Or they figured we'd head for Denver and took the most direct route, hoping to intercept us." "What do we do?" Reid considered their options quickly. "They haven't spotted us yet. We'll wait until they pass, then take an alternate route. It will add a day to our journey, but better that than confrontation." Rosalie nodded, grateful for his calm thinking. They remained motionless as Becker and his men approached, voices carrying clearly in the still afternoon air. "Xavier's no fool," Becker was saying, his harsh voice instantly recognizable to Rosalie. "He wouldn't take the main trail. Check those trees over there." Reid tensed, his hand moving to his revolver. "If they come this way, be ready to ride hard," he whispered. "Head northwest toward that ridge." "Don't wait for me." "I won't leave you," Rosalie protested. Before Reid could respond, one of Becker's men veered toward their hiding place. "Tracks here, boss, leading into those trees." "Go," Reid urged, pushing Rosalie toward her horse. "Now." In a flurry of motion, they mounted and burst from the trees, startling Becker's men. Reid fired 2 shots to provide cover as they galloped toward the ridge he had indicated. Shouts and gunfire erupted behind them. Rosalie bent low over her horse's neck, urging the animal to greater speed. She glanced back to see Reid following, his face set in determination as he occasionally turned to fire at their pursuers. The chase continued across the valley floor, Becker's men gaining ground on their fresher mounts. A bullet whistled past Rosalie's ear, too close for comfort. Another struck a tree trunk as they entered a wooded area, showering her with splinters. Reid pulled alongside her as they raced through the trees. "River ahead," he shouted over the thunder of hooves. "Follow it north. The current's strong, they won't expect us to cross." Rosalie nodded, focusing on guiding her horse through the increasingly dense forest. The sound of rushing water grew louder, and suddenly they broke through the tree line to find themselves on the bank of a swift-flowing river. Without hesitation, Reid led the way into the water. Rosalie followed, gasping as the cold current swirled around her legs. The horses struggled against the flow, water rising to their bellies as they fought to maintain footing on the slippery riverbed. Behind them, Becker and his men emerged from the forest, shouting and firing. A bullet struck the water near Rosalie, sending up a spray that momentarily blinded her. Her horse stumbled, nearly throwing her, but recovered and continued its determined crossing. By the time they reached the far bank, Becker's men were entering the water. Reid helped Rosalie up the steep embankment, then turned and fired deliberately at the men in the river. One cried out, clutching his shoulder, while another's horse panicked and turned back toward the bank they had left. "That will slow them down," Reid said grimly, reloading his revolver. "But they'll find another crossing point. We need to keep moving." Wet and shivering, they rode north along the riverbank for several miles before cutting inland toward the northwest, as Reid had originally planned. The detour would add considerable time to their journey, but it had bought them temporary safety. As dusk approached, they found shelter in a rocky overhang that provided both protection from the elements and a defensible position. Too exhausted to hunt, they made do with jerky and hard biscuits from their saddlebags, grateful for the small fire Reid managed to build despite their damp supplies. "You're bleeding," Rosalie noticed suddenly, seeing a dark stain spreading on Reid's shirt sleeve. Reid glanced at his arm with mild surprise. "Must have caught a bullet during the crossing. It's just a graze." Rosalie moved to his side, insisting on examining the wound. "Take off your shirt," she ordered, her tone brooking no argument. Reid complied with a faint smile. "Yes, madam." The wound was indeed a graze, but deeper than Reid had admitted. Rosalie cleaned it carefully with water from their canteen, then tore a strip from her petticoat to bind it. "Now we match," Reid observed, nodding toward her own bandaged arm. "I'd prefer we matched in less painful ways," Rosalie replied dryly, securing the bandage. Her fingers lingered on his bare shoulder, feeling the warmth of his skin and the strength in the muscles beneath. Reid caught her hand in his, holding it gently. "Thank you." Something in his voice made Rosalie look up, meeting his gaze. The firelight cast golden highlights in his brown hair and beard, softening the weathered lines of his face. For a moment they remained that way, connected by touch and gaze, the pretense of their marriage falling away to reveal something more honest and more complicated. Rosalie broke the contact first, withdrawing her hand with reluctance. "We should rest. Tomorrow will be difficult." Reid nodded, seemingly as affected by the moment as she was. "I'll take first watch again. Your arm needs the rest more than mine." As Rosalie settled into her bedroll, she found sleep elusive despite her exhaustion. The day's dangers had clarified something for her. Her feelings for Reid were becoming far from pretend. Somehow, in the space of less than a week, this quiet, honorable man had become important to her in ways she hadn't anticipated. But what future could there be for them, even if he felt the same? Their marriage was a convenience, a means to an end. Once they reached Denver and presented her evidence, their paths would naturally diverge. He would return to his ranch and she would. What? Start anew somewhere else. Return to the East. The possibilities seemed both limitless and deeply unsatisfying if they didn't include Reid. With these troubled thoughts, Rosalie finally drifted into sleep. The sound of Reid cleaning his revolver a strangely comforting backdrop to her dreams. Morning brought heavy clouds, and the threat of rain unwelcome conditions for travelers already delayed and pursued. They set out early, Reid's knowledge of the terrain guiding them through less obvious routes that would hopefully throw off Becker's tracking. By midday, a steady drizzle had set in, turning the trail muddy and obscuring visibility. They rode in companionable silence, each lost in thought, each acutely aware of the other's presence. "We should reach Denver by tomorrow evening if we maintain this pace," Reid said as they paused to rest the horses beside a small stream. "Assuming no more unexpected company." You think they're still following? Rosalie asked, scanning the misty landscape behind them. Men like Becker don't give up easily, Reid replied honestly. But this weather works in our favor harder to track us, and they can't move much faster than we can in this mud. Rosalie nodded, pulling her damp cloak tighter around her shoulders. The chill had settled into her bones, making her injured arm ache fiercely. Reid noticed her discomfort. There's an old line cabin about 2 hours ahead used by cattlemen driving herds to market. If it's still standing, we could stop there for the night. Dry out, get warm. That sounds heavenly, Rosalie admitted with a small smile. They continued their journey, the rain intensifying as afternoon wore on. By the time the cabin came into view, a small, sturdy structure nestled against a hillside. Both were thoroughly soaked and chilled. The cabin was basic but sound, with a stone fireplace, a rough-hewn table with 2 chairs, and a narrow cot against one wall. Reid set about building a fire while Rosalie tended to the horses in the lean-to attached to the cabin's side. Soon a cheerful blaze was warming the single room, steam rising from their wet clothing as they hung it near the fire to dry. Reid had packed a spare shirt and offered it to Rosalie, who gratefully changed behind a blanket strung up for privacy. The domesticity of the scene struck Rosalie as she emerged in Reid's oversized shirt, her damp hair loose around her shoulders. In another life, this could have been their home, a simple cabin, a fire against the rain, the comfort of each other's company. Reid had found coffee in his saddlebags, miraculously still dry, and was boiling water over the fire. The rich aroma filled the cabin, adding to the sense of home and hearth. "One luxury I never travel without," he explained with a smile, pouring the steaming liquid into tin cups. "Gets a man through the coldest nights." They sat close to the fire, savoring the coffee and the gradual return of warmth to their bodies. Outside, the rain continued to fall, drumming on the cabin's roof and transforming the world beyond their shelter into a gray blur. "May I ask you something personal?" Rosalie ventured after a comfortable silence. Reid nodded, his expression open. "Of course. Why have you never married? Really married, I mean." The question had been on her mind since she first learned he lived alone. A man like Reid, kind, capable, handsome in his rugged way, could surely have found a wife had he wanted one. Reid considered the question seriously, staring into the fire. "Came close once," he admitted. "Back in Texas before I started driving cattle. Her name was Elizabeth. Daughter of a rancher near my father's place." "What happened?" Rosalie asked softly. "War happened," Reid said simply. "I joined up with the Confederacy not because I believed in the cause, but because everyone I knew was going. By the time I came home 3 years later, Elizabeth had married a man who'd stayed behind." He shrugged, the old pain evident but dulled by time. "Can't blame her. War changes a man. I wasn't the same person she'd agreed to wait for." "I'm sorry," Rosalie said, understanding better now the shadows that sometimes crossed his face. "Life goes on," Reid replied, his tone lightening. "And your question assumes I wanted to marry again. Truth is, after Elizabeth, I was content with my own company. Easier that way. And now?" Rosalie couldn't help asking, though she immediately wished she could take back the too personal query. Reid's gaze shifted from the fire to her face, his eyes searching hers. "Now I'm finding that some things are worth the risk of being hurt again." The quiet statement hung in the air between them, charged with meaning. Rosalie felt her heartbeat quicken as Reid reached out to tuck a stray lock of hair behind her ear, his touch gentle. "This isn't part of our arrangement," he said softly, his hand coming to rest against her cheek. "And you can tell me to stop. But I need you to know that somewhere between finding you in my barn and sitting here with you now, My feelings have become very real." Rosalie covered his hand with her own, holding it against her face. "Mine too," she whispered, the admission both frightening and liberating. "I didn't expect this, any of it." Reid smiled, the warmth of it reaching his eyes. "Life rarely gives us what we expect. Sometimes it gives us something better." When he leaned forward to kiss her, Rosalie met him halfway. Unlike the brief, formal kiss that had sealed their wedding ceremony, this one was tender and questioning, an exploration rather than a declaration. His beard was soft against her skin, his lips warm and inviting. The kiss deepened naturally, Rosalie's arms sliding around Reid's neck as he drew her closer. The pretense between them dissolved completely, replaced by genuine desire and a connection that had been building since their first meeting. Later, as they lay together on the narrow cot, a blanket drawn over them against the chill, Rosalie traced the scar on Reid's jawline with gentle fingers. "How did you get this?" she asked, comfortable now in the intimacy they had discovered. Reid caught her hand and kissed her fingertips. "Bar fight in Dodge City. Man accused me of cheating at cards. Were you?" Rosalie asked with a smile. "No," Reid said, chuckling, "but I was winning, which amounts to the same thing to a sore loser." Outside, the rain had stopped, replaced by the quiet dripping of water from the cabin's eaves. The fire had burned down to glowing embers, casting the small room in soft, warm light. "What happens when we reach Denver?" Rosalie asked, the question that had been troubling her finally finding voice. "After we speak to the marshal and present the evidence." Reid propped himself up on one elbow, his expression serious. "That depends on you," he said honestly. "Our marriage was meant to be temporary, a means of getting you safely to Denver. If that's still what you want, I'll respect it. And if it's not what I want anymore." Rosalie held her breath, suddenly afraid of his answer. Reid's face softened. "Then we ride back to Cherry Creek together. Rebuild your father's farm if that's what you wish, or make a life at my ranch, or go somewhere new entirely. The choice would be ours." "Ours," Rosalie repeated, liking the sound of it. "I think I'd like that, the ranch, I mean. It feels like home already somehow." Reid kissed her again, a promise in the gesture. "Then that's what we'll do. Once justice is served for your father, we'll go home. Home." The word filled Rosalie with warmth and hope, emotions she had thought lost forever when her father was killed. Somehow, in the midst of tragedy and danger, she had found not just safety but the possibility of happiness. As they drifted toward sleep, wrapped in each other's arms, the future seemed suddenly brighter, still uncertain, still fraught with immediate danger, but no longer empty. They rose before dawn, reluctant to leave the sanctuary of the cabin, but aware of the importance of reaching Denver as quickly as possible. The morning was clear after the rain, the world washed clean and sparkling with dew. Their relationship had transformed overnight, the awkwardness of their arrangement replaced by a natural intimacy. They moved around each other with the easy familiarity of true partners, preparing for the day's journey with quiet efficiency. "If we push hard, we can reach Denver by nightfall," Reid said as they mounted their horses. "The marshal's office will be closed by then, but we can find lodging and go first thing in the morning." Rosalie nodded, determination setting her features. "Let's finish this, for my father and for us." The day's ride was long but untroubled by pursuit. Whether Becker and his men had lost their trail or given up the chase, they saw no sign of followers as they made their way through increasingly populated territory. By late afternoon, the distant skyline of Denver appeared on the horizon, a growing city of promise and opportunity that represented both the end of their journey and the beginning of whatever came next. As they rode into the outskirts of the city at dusk, Rosalie felt a mixture of exhaustion and anticipation. So much had happened since she fled her burning home less than 2 weeks ago: grief, fear, unexpected love, and now the prospect of justice. They found a modest hotel near the center of town, checking in as Mr. and Mrs. Xavier without the slightest hesitation. The clerk barely glanced at them, accustomed to tired travelers arriving at day's end. Their room was simple but clean, with a real bed that seemed luxurious after nights on the trail. After a proper meal in the hotel's dining room, their first restaurant meal together, they retired early, both needing rest before facing the marshal the next day. Morning found them refreshed and resolved. Rosalie dressed with care in her cleanest remaining clothes, conscious of making a respectable impression. The documents that might bring her father's killers to justice were secure in a leather pouch, checked and rechecked throughout their journey. The U.S. Marshal's office was a substantial brick building near the courthouse, its entrance flanked by the American flag. Inside, they were directed to Marshal James Donovan, a formidable man with iron-gray hair and shrewd eyes that missed nothing. Mr. and Mrs. Xavier, he greeted them, gesturing to chairs before his desk. What brings you to Denver? Rosalie took a deep breath and began her story, starting with her father's discovery of silver on their land and ending with his murder at Blake's orders. Throughout her account, Reid sat supportive beside her, occasionally adding details about their journey and the pursuit by Becker's men. Marshal Donovan listened without interruption, his expression grave. When Rosalie presented the documents, her father's deed to the land, his notes on the silver vein, and the letter documenting Blake's threats, the marshal examined them carefully. "These are serious accusations," he said finally, looking up from the papers. "Thomas Blake is a powerful man in the territory, but if what you say is true and these documents are genuine, he'll answer for it. Murder isn't excused because a man wears an expensive suit." "What happens now?" Reid asked, his hand finding Rosalie's and squeezing it gently. "I'll send telegrams to Sheriff Mason in Cherry Creek and to the federal judge in Denver," Marshal Donovan explained. "We'll need statements from both of you, properly sworn. Then I'll dispatch deputies to locate Becker and his men, as well as Blake himself." He fixed them with a stern look. "This won't be quick or easy. Blake has money and connections. There will be a trial and you'll both need to testify. Are you prepared for that?" Rosalie straightened in her chair. "My father deserves justice, Marshal Donovan. I'll do whatever is necessary." "As will I," Reid added firmly. The marshal nodded, something like approval in his eyes. "Very well. I suggest you remain in Denver for the time being. The Palace Hotel is secure and comfortable. I'll send word when we have Blake in custody." Outside the marshal's office, Rosalie felt lighter than she had in days. "He believed us," she said, relief evident in her voice. "The evidence speaks for itself," Reid replied, guiding her through the busy Denver streets. "And Donovan strikes me as an honest man. If anyone can bring Blake to justice, he can." They relocated to the Palace Hotel as suggested, a grander establishment than their previous night's lodging. As they settled into their new accommodations, a different kind of tension emerged, the uncertainty of what came next. "It could be weeks before the trial," Rosalie said that evening as they sat in the hotel's dining room. "Maybe longer." "We have time," Reid assured her, reaching across the table to take her hand. "And we have each other. That's more than either of us had 2 weeks ago." Rosalie smiled, the simple truth of his words warming her. "Yes, it is." The following days established a rhythm for them: mornings spent providing additional information to the marshal's office, afternoons exploring Denver or writing letters to neighbors in Cherry Creek to check on Reid's ranch. In the evenings, they dined together and talked long into the night, learning each other's stories and dreams. A week after their arrival, Marshal Donovan summoned them to his office with news. "We've arrested Becker and 2 of his men," he informed them, satisfaction evident in his tone. "Caught them in a saloon in Colorado Springs. They're being transported to Denver as we speak." "And Blake?" Rosalie asked eagerly, the marshal's expression sobered. "Not yet. He's disappeared from his Denver offices. We have men watching his mining operations and his home, but so far, no sign of him." "He's running," Reid said grimly. "Perhaps," Marshal Donovan allowed. "But a man like Blake has resources and connections. He could be hiding in plain sight, or he might have left the territory entirely." "We'll find him eventually. Men like that always make mistakes." As they left the marshal's office, Reid noticed Rosalie's troubled expression. "What is it?" he asked gently. "I was just thinking about home," she admitted. "Your ranch, our ranch now, I suppose. I wonder how everything is faring in our absence." Reid considered this. "We could return, you know. Now that Becker's been arrested, it might be safe enough. We'd need to come back for the trial, but that could be months away." Hope brightened Rosalie's features. "Could we? I'd like that. Denver is exciting, but it doesn't feel like home." "I'll speak with Donovan tomorrow," Reid promised. "See if he thinks it's safe for us to return to Cherry Creek for the time being." Marshal Donovan was cautious but ultimately supportive of their plan. "Keep your whereabouts known to Sheriff Mason," he advised. "And be vigilant. Blake is still at large and he might hold a grudge." With the marshal's blessing, they prepared to leave Denver, purchasing supplies for the journey home and sending a telegram to inform Sheriff Mason of their impending return. The trip back to Cherry Creek was markedly different from their flight to Denver. Relaxed, almost honeymoon-like in its pleasure. They traveled at an easier pace, taking time to appreciate the beauty of the landscape and each other's company without the constant fear of pursuit. 4 days later, they crested the final ridge and saw Cherry Creek in the valley below, the sight bringing smiles to both their faces. Beyond the town, Reid's ranch waited their home now, a place to build the future they had unexpectedly found together. News of their return spread quickly through the small community. By the time they had settled back into the cabin and begun assessing what needed attention after their absence, visitors arrived. First Sheriff Mason, then Henry Wilkins and his wife, followed by other neighbors curious about their adventures in Denver. Reid handled the visitors with good-natured patience, sharing carefully edited versions of their journey while Rosalie prepared coffee and the fresh biscuits Henry's wife had thoughtfully brought. When they were finally alone again, Rosalie found Reid on the porch, watching the sunset paint the distant mountains. "It feels different," she observed, joining him. "Coming back as your wife. Your real wife, I mean." Reid smiled, drawing her into the circle of his arms. "Best decision I ever made, finding you in my barn. Even with all the trouble I brought with me," Rosalie teased, though there was a hint of genuine question beneath her words. "Especially with that," Reid assured her, his expression growing serious. "Before you came, I was existing, not living. Taking care of the ranch, getting by day to day. You reminded me that life is meant to be more." As night fell around them, they remained on the porch, planning their future together, expanding the cabin, increasing the herd, perhaps eventually building a proper house. Simple dreams, but precious in their shared vision. The weeks that followed settled into a pleasant routine. They worked side by side during the day, Reid teaching Rosalie about ranch operations, Rosalie bringing her own skills to their partnership. In the evenings, they often sat together on the porch, reading aloud from Reid's collection of books or simply talking. Word came periodically from Marshal Donovan in Denver. Becker had confessed under questioning. implicating Blake directly in ordering Pennington's murder. The search for Blake continued, with reported sightings from Wyoming to New Mexico, though none had proven accurate. As autumn deepened toward winter, Rosalie discovered she was expecting a child, news that filled Reid with a joy he had never imagined possible. They celebrated quietly, planning for this new addition to their family with practical excitement. "We should finish the addition to the cabin before spring," Reid said one evening as they sat by the fire, his hand resting protectively on Rosalie's still flat stomach. "Give us more room for the little one. And a proper kitchen," Rosalie added dreamily, "with shelves for preserves and a bigger stove." "Anything you want," Reid promised, kissing her forehead. Their peaceful existence was interrupted one crisp November morning by the arrival of Sheriff Mason, his expression grave as he dismounted in their yard. "Reid, Rosalie," he greeted them soberly. "I've news from Denver. Thomas Blake has been found. They've captured him." Rosalie asked eagerly, her hand finding Reid's. Sheriff Mason shook his head. "No, madam. He's dead. Found in a hotel room in Santa Fe. Appears he took his own life rather than face trial." The news landed heavily between them. Blake's death meant justice of a sort, but not the public reckoning Rosalie had hoped for, the official acknowledgement of her father's murder and the clearing of his name. "There was a letter," Sheriff Mason continued, reaching into his coat. "Addressed to you, Mrs. Xavier. Marshal Donovan sent it along, thought you should have it." Rosalie accepted the envelope with trembling fingers. Inside was a single sheet of expensive stationery, the handwriting elegant but shaky. "Mrs. Pennington Xavier," it began. "By the time you read this, I will have departed this life, sparing us both the spectacle of a trial. I do not seek your forgiveness for what was done to your father. Some actions are beyond absolution. I sought wealth at any cost, and found instead the hollow victory of a man who has lost his soul in the pursuit of fortune. Know that I have left instructions for my estate to compensate you for your father's land, at 5 times its value. It is blood money, to be sure, but perhaps it will serve to build something worthwhile from the ashes of my sins. May you find peace where I could not. Thomas Blake." Rosalie lowered the letter, tears streaming unchecked down her face. Reid's arm came around her shoulders, steady and supportive. "Are you all right?" he asked softly. Rosalie nodded slowly. "I think so. It's not the justice I imagined, but perhaps it's justice nonetheless." She looked up at Sheriff Mason. "Is it over, then, the case against Blake's men?" "Becker and his accomplices will still stand trial," the sheriff confirmed. "Marshal Donovan is determined to see it through, Blake or no Blake. You'll likely be called to testify in the spring." After Sheriff Mason departed, Rosalie and Reid sat together on the porch steps, contemplating this unexpected conclusion. "How do you feel?" Reid asked, his thumb gently wiping away the last of her tears. Rosalie considered the question carefully. "Relieved, I think. And sad, in a way I can't quite explain. For my father, for the waste of it all." She placed her hand over her stomach where their child grew, "but mostly grateful for what we've found despite everything." Reid's arms tightened around her. "Your father would be proud of you, Rosalie. Your strength, your determination to see justice done. He would have liked you," Rosalie said with a small smile. "He always said he wanted a son-in-law who could quote Shakespeare." Reid laughed, the sound warm in the crisp air. "I'm glad I qualify." The money from Blake's estate arrived in the spring, a fortune that left them momentarily stunned by its magnitude. After careful consideration, they decided to use part of it to establish a school in Cherry Creek, naming it in honor of Rosalie's father. The rest they invested in expanding the ranch and setting aside funds for their child's future. By summer, The cabin had been expanded significantly, a proper bedroom for the baby, a larger kitchen for Rosalie, and a covered porch where they could watch the sunset together. The ranch was thriving, with additional cattle purchased and new hands hired to help manage the growing operation. In July, Rosalie testified at the trial of Becker and his men in Denver, her testimony delivered with quiet dignity despite her advanced pregnancy. Reid sat in the courtroom throughout, his presence a source of strength. When the verdict came guilty on all counts, a chapter closed for both of them. Their son, Thomas Reid Xavier, was born on a clear September morning, exactly 1 year after Rosalie had fled her burning home and found refuge in a stranger's barn. He had his mother's dark hair and his father's blue eyes, a perfect blend of them both. As Rosalie nursed their son beside the fire on his first night home, Reid watched them with wonder, still amazed by the twists of fate that had brought them together. "Who would have thought," he said softly, "that finding you hiding in my barn would lead to this? That your secret past would become our shared future?" Rosalie smiled up at him, love evident in every line of her face. "The best stories never follow the path we expect," she replied, echoing words he had once said to her. "Sometimes life gives us something better than we could have imagined." Outside, the Colorado night wrapped around their home like a protective cloak. Stars scattered across the sky like promises of light in darkness. Within the warmth of their cabin, a family born of tragedy and courage looked toward tomorrow with hope, their shared future stretching before them, unwritten but full of possibility. 5 years later, the Xavier Ranch had grown into one of the most prosperous in the region. The original cabin was now part of a larger, comfortable house that echoed with the laughter of children, 4-year-old Thomas and his 2-year-old sister, Elizabeth, named for Reid's first love in a gesture of healing and remembrance. Cherry Creek had flourished as well, the Pennington School becoming a center of community pride and education. Rosalie taught there 3 days a week, sharing her father's love of learning with a new generation. Reid had expanded beyond cattle into horse breeding, his stock gaining reputation throughout the territory for quality and training. Their prosperity allowed them to help others, hiring veterans who needed work, supporting families who had fallen on hard times, quietly funding improvements to the town. On the anniversary of their first meeting, Reid and Rosalie made a tradition of riding out alone to the spot where the old barn had stood, replaced now by a larger, more modern structure, but preserved in their memory as the place where their story began. "I was so afraid that night," Rosalie remembered as they spread a blanket beneath an old oak tree. "Hurt, hunted, certain my life was over. And I was suspicious of the beautiful, bleeding woman in my hayloft," Reid added with a smile, unpacking the picnic basket they had brought. "Wondering what trouble she would bring." "Quite a lot, as it turned out," Rosalie laughed, accepting the glass of wine he offered. "The best kind of trouble," Reid corrected, raising his glass in toast. "The kind that changes your life exactly when you didn't know it needed changing." As they shared their meal in the dappled shade, the ranch spread before them, fields dotted with cattle, pastures where horses grazed, the house in the distance where their children played under the watchful eye of Mary, the young woman from town who helped with the household. "Do you ever regret it?" Rosalie asked suddenly. "Taking me in that day, marrying me to help me reach Denver, all the danger you faced because of my troubles." Reid set down his glass and took her hands in his. "Not for a single moment," he said, his voice rich with conviction. "Finding you was the beginning of everything good in my life. I'd face those dangers 1,000 times over if it meant ending up here with you and our children." Rosalie leaned forward to kiss him, the gesture as natural as breathing after 6 years together. "I love you," Reid Xavier. Then, now, always. And I love you, Rosalie Xavier, he replied, pulling her closer. My unexpected wife, my partner, my home. As the afternoon sun cast long shadows across the land that had become their legacy, they remained together beneath the oak tree, surrounded by the life they had built from unlikely beginnings. A cowboy and a woman with a secret past who had found in each other not just safety or justice, but the rarest gift of all. A love that had transformed them both, creating from separate paths a shared journey neither could have imagined alone.